So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Winey. I'm the Dean of the College of Biological Sciences. I'm really pleased to welcome you here for this maybe unique event. First, before we start off with the conversation and the introductions, I need to do a few housekeeping things. Today's conversation will have a short question and answer afterwards. You can see there's microphones there and there, or we can bring them to you if you want to wave your hands. So you'll have an opportunity to ask a question there, or there's a reception afterwards as well with our guests. Second, the event today is being recorded. So we're not live streaming on Zoom, but we are recording. So if you make sure your phone's off, clear your throat, and we'll try to keep it as quiet in the background as possible. The Q&A will be recorded as well. So as I already mentioned, today's event is special. Not only do we have our guests achieved remarkable feats in their respective careers, they are connected by discoveries in basic science that improve the lives of millions of people. They were both zoology majors in the then Division of Biological Sciences. Today, zoology falls under the Evolution, Ecology, and Biodiversity major housed in Evolution and Ecology in the College of Biological Sciences. Though their careers followed different trajectories, their common passion for life sciences is a big part of why we're here today. And as you know, our guests are Charlie Rice and Rolf Benirschke. Charlie Rice received his undergraduate degree here from UC Davis in 1974, and today is one of the world's most accomplished virologists. He's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, and he's the Maurice R. and Corinne P. Greenberg Chair of Virology at the Rockefeller University in New York City. Charlie is famous for producing the first infectious molecular clone of the hepatitis C virus, which was essential in studying this pathogen. His efforts led to a cure for Hep C, which affects 70 million people globally, at least. For his work, he and his collaborators have won numerous awards, culminating possibly in the 2020 Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology, the first affiliate of the University of California, Davis, to win the Nobel Prize. He's also the recipient of the 2021 UC Davis Medal, the highest honor bestowed by our university. This prize recognizes those who have motivated our university community and the public to learn, experiment, and achieve their full potential, and to make our university and the world a better place. Our other alumni guests, Rolf Benirschke, graduated from UC Davis in 1977. He had a 10-year career with the San Diego Chargers, during which he received numerous honors, including NFL Man of the Year. When he retired, he was the third most accurate place kicker in NFL history. Importantly, you will learn today that since then, he's become a tireless patient advocate. As a survivor of hepatitis C, which he contracted from a blood transfusion, Rolf is a spokesman for those with the virus. He's participated in several clinical trials and started a national awareness and patient support group called Kick Hep C. When Charlie won the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine, I received a call from Rolf, and he explained that he had been cured of Hep C and wanted to contact his fellow alum, Charlie, to express his gratitude. Today's event's kind of the culmination of that initial phone call. It was a great bench-to-bedside moment, and it's a special day when a scientist who studies a disease are contacted by someone who was cured by their work. And that's exactly what's happening here. It illustrates the impact we strive for at UC Davis. It also demonstrates the role of basic sciences in enhancing our collective health, livelihood, and place on the planet. Moderating today's discussion is our third UC Davis alum, our Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor, Mary Croughan. A lifelong Aggie, Mary earned her Bachelor of Science degree in Community Health here at UC Davis, and then her PhD in Epidemiology at the Johns Hopkins University of Hygiene and Public Health. She's a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, is an executive committee member for the Association for Public and Land-Grant Universities, and on their Academic Affairs Council. Please join me in welcoming Charlie Rice, Rolf Benirschke, and Mary Croughan to the stage. Now, we've already spent some time chatting, and this should be wonderful, and I'm going to have to stop them, I'm afraid, so that we get the Q&A in. But Mary, the stage is yours.
Turn on my mic, although as a professor, I can actually shout out into the courtyard without a problem, so hopefully I won't be too loud for the mic. So thank you all for being here today, and most importantly, thanks to two wonderful, outstanding fellow Aggies. And yes, we won't talk till 2 or 3 this morning, I promise, but we could. We had trouble ending our lunch meeting anywhere near on time, so it was a very enjoyable time. So to get to the questions so that you can get to know each of them better, I'm going to just get started. A general question that I'd like each of you to answer is just how did your UC Davis education contribute to your achievements in your respective fields? And Charlie, I'll start with you.
Well, at least for me, it was pivotal.
Oh, the mic's, turn on your box.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Well, as you try and think back on, sort of what has, sort of determined your life path, I will say that despite catching a few viruses at UC Davis, I don't think it was really sort of targeted to actually sort of studying them. But I think what really was sort of defining me was coming to UC Davis. This was kind of my first time, sort of away from home, not really being very focused on, sort of why I was going to college, to the university. And that was really influenced a lot by an introductory biology class that I took here. It was taught by Dennis Barrett, who was a developmental biologist who actually trained at Caltech before he came to Davis as a faculty member. And I loved that class. And it turned out that interaction with Dennis over the years here really sort of led me to undergraduate research, where the campus was really, despite all of the undergraduates, there was the opportunity to go to a professor and ask him if you could work in their lab. And Dennis was working on sea urchin development. You can take the sperm and the eggs and mix them together, and voila, you can actually watch fertilization occur and development happen. And the other thing that was pivotal there, besides a lot of other activities at Davis, was that Dennis actually taught a course at Woods Hole, the physiology course at the Marine Biology Laboratory in Woods Hole. And he suggested that I go to this class sort of in between my junior and senior years. And that was sort of the first time that I was really completely immersed in research, both lectures by really some fantastic scientists that were there that probably were there mostly to hang out and have fun in Woods Hole rather than teach us. But it was really a transformative experience. So there were a lot of different aspects. And I also think I got a really sort of broad education at UC Davis. And so those encounters really sort of shaped the trajectory of my career, because Dennis Barrett, basically, as I said, had gone to Caltech. He suggested that maybe I should apply there to graduate school. And so I did. And I got in, and I ended up not being placed in a lab that studies sea urchins, which I was sort of targeting targeting that lab at Caltech, but rather a virology lab. And maybe rotations weren't as encouraged in those days as they are now in PhD programs, but I really enjoyed that, and that was sort of what set me on the course of working on viruses.
Wonderful. Thank you. Rolf, would you like me to repeat the question or?
Hard to follow.
Okay, I know, I know. I
He'll
should have
do a
been
great job.
kinder
I'm
and
sure.
called on you first. So how did your UC Davis education contribute to your achievements in your respective field? And I would say you could respond both as a kicker on a football team, TV personality, motivational speaker, all the aspects of your life.
So first of all, is my mic on? Here we go. First of all, thank you for coming. I see a bunch of old teammates, classmates, roommates. Means a lot to me. When you asked the question, my mind went back a few years ago to when we were here. Like Charlie, I really didn't know what I was going to do. I was raised in an academic medical family. My dad was a medical school teacher. I actually grew up in a lab, did a lot of work in my dad's lab over the years. When I was in college, I worked in the summers at the San Diego Zoo in the lab. I studied zoology here, and I had it turned on.
I believe it is. No? Okay,
But now, is it better now?
okay.
Maybe you can't hear me. So I kind of grew up in a lab, which is ironic that I'm sitting here, but I was a huge disappointment to my dad, who is this renowned scientist, author of over 500 journal articles, chapters of 27 books. To have his middle son end up the NFL was a huge disappointment.
I'll vouch for his father. I did research with him. So not the disappointment part, but world-renowned
It
scientist.
was very real, but the impact Davis had on me is really immeasurable. And I will go to the sports side. I didn't actually play football until I was a senior in high school. I was talked into it when soccer-style kicking was just becoming popular. And we had just moved from New England. My dad was a medical school teacher at Dartmouth, was recruited to help start the medical school at UCSD. So we moved out here. I was going into 10th grade. I was so disappointed. He didn't ask us kids. I was the middle of three. I was a hockey player, soccer player, tennis player, ski racer, and they had none of those sports in San Diego. We started a soccer team my junior year, and that was when we learned here soccer's played in the winter. Had I stayed back in the fall, soccer was always played in the fall, and I would always have been a soccer player. We move out here. We started a soccer team. One day after soccer practice, 3 guys on the football team came up and said, "Have you guys ever kicked a football?" And 5 of us raised our hands. Truly, the only footballs I ever kicked prior to that was walking home as a kid across the Dartmouth athletic fields. We used to kick footballs, throw lacrosse balls, kick soccer balls. The next thing we know, we're having a kicking competition. And please don't tell anybody, kicking a football is really very easy if you can kick a soccer ball. And I was the last guy standing at this little competition. Kicked a 50-yarder, What we didn't know is the head football coach was watching. And he came over to me and said, "We don't have a kicker your senior year. We'd love for you to kick." I'm thinking, I don't know. I'm not a football player. I'm 135 pounds. But he talked me into it. So I kicked my senior year in high school. Again, it was easy, had some success, and all of a sudden had scholarship opportunities to go to Stanford, USC, Cal, San Diego State to kick. So I go to my dad, who is a German immigrant. We did not have a television grow up. We did not watch football. And I go, "Dad, I can go to Stanford to play football. What do you think?" And he looked at me like I had 3 eyes. He goes, "That's not why you go to college. You go to study." And so I never brought it up again. I had a passion for zoology. So I had signed up to go to UC Davis. There were 3 of us kids going to be in high school at the same time. We didn't have a lot of money. So I ended up here, and where Davis changed my life, I was in my dorm room, Tercero, H building, a week into it, and I get a phone call. I'm going, who even knows I'm here? I picked the phone up, and it's Coach Jim Soker, head football guy. I go, "Why are you calling?" And he goes, "I'm calling because I just got berated on the phone by the head coach at USC suggesting I'm paying players to get them to Davis." more than a little chuckle. Remember, reg fees back then were $212 a quarter. We were Division II non-scholarship. Why are you accusing me of that, Coach Robinson? And Coach Robinson goes, we recruited this kicker, and he turned down USC to go to Davis. You got to be doing something illegal. Jim goes, we didn't sign a kicker. What's his name? And he works through the reg department, and he finds my phone number in the dorm, and he talks me into playing football. And he changes my life. So that was one thing. But more than that, it was the way this community accepted us. We were lost, rookie, freshmen trying to find our way. And Jim Soker and Will Lauder on the athletic side, my college roommate, who's just a great friend here, my teammates allowed me to play soccer and football at the same time. I used to go to the Raptor Center. I'm a big bird watcher. I met a bird watcher here in the back. We were telling stories about looking at short-eared owls in the spray fields. So the environment here just allowed me to sort of do things that I enjoyed doing, and was all like Charlie. I got accepted to go to Cornell graduate school and was all ready to go when I was the last player drafted in the draft. And my dad was horrified, and I thought I would just see what it was like, not really expecting I would be there. And then the last thing I'd answer is, I was actually drafted by the Oakland Raiders in 1977. They had just won the Super Bowl. Remember Kenny Stabler and Coach Madden and Cliff Branch and all those guys? Well, I remember going to the locker room, and after spending a few weeks there, I realized me, from little old UC Davis, was more qualified to handle the things around that profession than the guys that went to Michigan, Alabama, USC, because that's all they did. My life was so different. And it was because of the upbringing here. It wasn't just football. It was all this other stuff that we got to do. And I remember feeling so grateful. And post-football, it was so much easier for me than a lot of those guys who, by the time they were 10, that's all they did. They didn't realize there were other things to do, and they didn't have the expansion of experience that we got here, and it started here. So really eternally grateful for this being our launching place.
I love it. I would say ditto to both of you, but I'm not one of the people being interviewed, so I'll start again with you, in spite of you just speaking. What advice do you have for current UC Davis students? We have a lot in the audience. I was looking around, as well as recent graduates, as they navigate their own paths in the professional world. So what advice would you give?
I'll give you good and bad news from my perspective. I'm 69, and I look back at my life, and I would say it was as unplanned as it could be. So the bad news is whatever plans you're making, I'm guessing they're not going to work out the way you're planning. That's the bad news. The good news is if you're curious, if you are around good people, smart people, ethical people, if you follow things that are important to you, are passionate about you, and when bad things happen to you, if you don't necessarily put them in the bad category, but that's interesting, what happens next category, you can look back at our age and go, what an amazing, interesting life I got to lead. So my advice would be to be curious, follow your passion, take chances. We have a short time on this earth. There's so much interesting stuff out there, people out there, things to do. With that sort of attitude and grateful spirit, you're going to have an extraordinary life. And for me, just to sit and catch up with some of these guys here in the audience, to see their lives, I think we get to this point and are just extraordinarily grateful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot to add to that.
Okay.
I think Rolf has said it all. I mean, it really is a lot about, sort of finding your passion and following it. And I think as at least as a scientist, what I've found is, I mean, it does require sort of, hard work and tenacity when things don't work. But it really is, it's really been a fortunate circumstance for me to actually, sort of do something and get paid for it that's actually my hobby. To go to so-called work every day, and it's not work, it's what I would choose to be doing, regardless. And, if you can find something that sort of captures you like that, I think it's just a wonderful way to live your life. And yeah, I think passion, sort of hard work, tenacity, and exploration. And I think for me, that was also an aspect of being at UC Davis. I was, very, I think, unfocused as to what I wanted to do. So it was biology, chemistry, some math, sort of zoology. We both sort of graduated in zoology. In my case, it was just kind of by default. And, that sort of broad exploration, I think, is really, really helpful.
I'd add one thing too, Mary. I think you agree, Charlie. Whatever you learn in life, even if it's something as esoteric as bird watching, or you'll always use that knowledge somewhere again in your life. So even if you fail at something, if you start something and you fail, you learn and you grow, and you look back at the way we've learned. It's a lot of that. So don't be afraid to try something and have it not work out, and because you're learning something in the process.
Great advice. Thank you. Charlie, the next question's just for you. And I'm sorry, this got printed in blue. I have a visual impairment, so I've got to hold it really close to my eyes to be able to read. So I'm sorry. I did not think to reprint it in black because I was expecting better lighting. But as a Nobel Laureate in physiology or medicine, what advice do you have for young researchers aspiring to make meaningful contributions to the field of infectious diseases, particularly in the context of emerging viral threats? And you are welcome to talk COVID, Hep C, whatever you would like. And I will ask you to add in part of what I learned at lunch about trainees too.
Yeah.
So students stay open.
Well, I mean, I think, sort of at least from my perspective, infectious disease is very important. It's something that we're actually never going to be without. And really sort of what excites me about the horizon of what sort of young researchers have today is really not only sort of a knowledge base of what's come before, but also just some amazing tools to sort of study biology, things that were just inconceivable. I mean, the sort of speed and depth with which we can do nucleic acid sequencing now. I mean, we couldn't really do that when I was a graduate student at all. And now it's, you can determine the human genome in, a matter of hours. It's really quite remarkable. The sort of revolution in editing technologies, the sort of CRISPR sort of revolution that is a current toolkit that we have today that, is kind of like recombinant DNA was back when I was growing up as a graduate student. So I think, curiosity, the same things that are, sort of important for a successful career in whatever you choose to do are, sort of the attributes that you need to have as a scientist. And that does involve taking risks. If there's something that you really find interesting and, it's kind of out of the box, I think you have to have sort of a low threshold for, trying to design a go, no-go experiment to see if this is something that's really, sort of compelling to study. So I think the trainees of today, really have, an amazing road ahead. And I think, sort of, if you think back, now, sort of 50 years, we've focused mainly on, sort of viruses that cause human, animal, or plant disease. And now with these new sequencing technologies, we realize that we were really just sort of sampling a tiny fraction of what we call the virome. And they're, literally, viruses are, sort of the most prolific entities on the planet. So there are a lot of them out there. I think we're still, in terms of, sort of predicting the next pandemic, I mean, we have sort of the usual suspects, coronaviruses and influenza and so on. But there's a huge space of viruses out there that we have no idea as to whether or not they have a high probability of crossing over sort of across species into humans and, sort of causing disease. So I think that's also one of the things that we will be able to make some progress in, not only by sort of acquiring knowledge, both in terms of looking at viral sequences, but also correlating with, sort of whether or not they cause disease, what kind of disease they cause, and integrating all these different data sets of knowledge. And I think that's where artificial intelligence is also going to play a big role in trying to make sense out of these masses of data that we can generate, and hopefully come up with some predictive value into the potential pathogens that we can pay attention to in the laboratory and study them and figure out how to inhibit them. So I don't know if that.
Oh, that's great. So I'll ask you to add a little bit about the role of risk-taking in science and taking chances. And so how you went about studying, as we used to call it, non-A, non-B hepatitis, what's now hepatitis C.
Yeah, I don't know how many of you are sort of familiar with this story, but in the sort of discovery of human viruses that cause liver disease, the first one of these was, sort of hepatitis B. And then the second was hepatitis A. And then it became clear, particularly to those in the sort of transfusion medicine area, that transfusions were giving rise to viral hepatitis, but it wasn't due to hepatitis A or hepatitis B. So Harvey Alter, in his great wisdom, named this agent or agents non-A, non-B hepatitis. So not a very catchy name. And this was recognized in about 1975, and it elicited a rush in academia and industry to try and figure out, what was the causative agent. It was shown that this virus it was a virus, it was filterable, it didn't get trapped on filters that would trap bacteria. But the only experimental model for studying this was either patient samples or experimentally infected chimpanzees. There were efforts to try and to get it to grow in the laboratory that had failed. And then in 1989, Michael Houghton and his group at Croughan actually cloned a little piece of the genome of this virus, and then sort of built that out and and it turned out to be the non-A, non-B agent, quite widespread, affecting tens of millions of people around the world, called it hepatitis C virus. I was, at the time, an assistant professor at Washington University, and we had been studying a virus called yellow fever virus, which some of you may have heard of. It is so-called a flavivirus, which sort of comes from the word sort of yellow. This was, one of the first human viruses discovered in 1900 by Walter Reed. And in the middle 1930s, Max Tyler actually made a live attenuated vaccine strain of yellow fever, which is kind of the prototype vaccine that we would like to have for the way all these viruses work. One shot, lifelong protection. It's been in about 500 million people over the years. And so we began actually trying to understand more about what the genome structure of this virus was. And this is what I was doing sort of at Washington University when I was an assistant professor. And then lo and behold, hepatitis C virus shows up, and it turns out to be placed in the same family of viruses as yellow fever. So I had to sort of make a decision at that point as to whether or not, the lab should study this, sort of very important virus. I mean, you could argue that, well, yellow fever with this vaccine, why are you wasting your time studying this? We already have, sort of a protective vaccine. But on the other hand, the problem with studying hepatitis C was, as I mentioned, The only animal model that supported this infection was the chimpanzee, which is very difficult to work with, and we actually can't do, sort of biomedical type research on these animals anymore. And it didn't grow in the laboratory. And but we decided to start working on it anyway. And it'll take me probably all evening to go through all of the things that we tried that didn't work. But it turned out to be a long road from 1989 to actually discovering the complete genome sequence of the virus. There was actually a piece missing at one end of the viral genome. And then actually putting together a molecular clone of that virus that was infectious in the chimpanzee model. And that wasn't done until almost 10 years, sort of after the discovery of hepatitis C. And after that, we sort of could build on those findings to develop systems that were useful for drug discovery, drug screening, that turned out to be very important for biotech and pharma to go on and sort of develop these drugs. But, it was an investment in my lab over, almost a decade to sort of get to the point where we could even begin to study this virus the way that we wanted to in the laboratory and in cell culture. So I don't know why we sort of stuck with it, except that I think we were just pig-headed and we knew that it should be possible and we were going to do it or die trying. And eventually it worked out. But I think, again, if you really feel strongly about something, you have to go for it. And as Rolf said, sometimes these things don't work out. It's not the end of the world. But you have to sort of make that decision as to whether or not you're going to move forward on something or throw in the towel. And I would just sort of echo, this comes up a lot with sort of young trainees, thinking about, sort of what they're going to do with their life and, sort of starting on one course and then worrying about this is it, this decision has got to be what's absolutely right for me for the rest of my life. And that's not true. And you can change directions. You can study different things if you're a scientist. So it's not the end of the world if you have to change course.
Wonderful, thank you. So
I'm glad he kept going
yes,
and got 10 years of that to find the answers.
yes, which leads me into exactly the question I was going to ask you. So Dean Winey brought up your own experience, just mentioned it with hepatitis C. You now are spending time with the man who helped to cure you. I would love to hear and have the audience hear a little about your own journey, your sense of gratefulness, and what it means to get to meet Charles now.
Well, thank you. So, like all of you, I got one of the Aggie newsletters, and I saw where Charlie was recognized for his Nobel Prize on the discovery of the hepatitis C virus. So I'll tell you my story, but I reached out to Dean and said, I'd love to meet him. Can you connect me? And he's a Nobel Prize winner, I got him a note. He says, I'm busy for the next 6 months. I'm going everywhere. But here we sit together, and I'm just so grateful, Charlie, personally, but what you've done for millions and millions of people. So I got sick in my second season with the Chargers. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And let's face it, I'm a kicker, not a football player. And I have a stomachache with bad diarrhea, right? So you kind of keep playing because your teammates are tearing shoulders and getting concussed, and you got a stomachache with bad diarrhea. Suck it up, you're a freaking kicker, right? But I kept getting sort of worse and worse, and by the end of the season, I was literally playing the game on Sunday. Sunday night, they would put me in a hospital. They'd put a central IV line in my neck. I'd be fed kind of all week. They would pull the line on Saturday. I'd spend the night with the team, play the game on Sunday, back in the hospital on Sunday night. And so for a month, I hardly ate, but I kept playing because you're the only kicker and they're depending on you. And if you stop, there's 100 kickers that'll take your job. So you kind of just keep trying to do it. Tried to, that off season, every treatment for Crohn's disease at the time, this is 1978, there were not a lot of options. We have none of the drugs that we have today available back then. Convinced, I did everything, every traditional medicine, then I tried acupuncture, biofeedback, I changed my diet, I did everything that I could to try to get rid of my Crohn's disease. Convinced myself I was better. The team allowed me to, during 2-a-days, I could only kick 1 a day. They were great about doing all these things. Anyway, short story is I collapsed on the team plane. 4 games into it. I had to go to the hospital. Same hospital my dad was working. They do a surgery, take out part of my colon. And then 6 days later, the anastomosis breaks down, and now I'm leaking bacteria into my gut, my abdomen, and I collapse. They do a second surgery 6 days after the first, and I wake up from that surgery. I'm now 120 pounds. I've lost 65 pounds. I have 2 ostomy bags on my side. I'm septic, and my doctors, my dad's colleagues, are telling him, we don't think Rolf's going to survive the night. And I really shouldn't have. I had a near-death experience with the Lord and survived that night. And then the next night, and the next night, and would spend 6 weeks in the ICU and 2 months in the hospital, and then released to the care of my parents, looking around going, my life is over. Why didn't I die? I was ready to die. I'd made peace with the Lord. I was ready to die. I couldn't imagine. There was nothing in my life I thought I could do that I enjoyed with 2 ostomy bags. Certainly my NFL career was over in my mind. I was single and 24 years old, and I like girls. I'm going, that's kind of over too. And I like sports. I go, I'll never do that. Lord, take my life. And I didn't die. And I now had to learn to live with this. And ultimately, with the disease colon out, I started to recover. My body healed. And because I was still under contract with the team, I was allowed to get rehabilitated there. And again, a seminal moment, seminal person in my life, our strength coach, took me under his wing and he nursed me back to health. I couldn't jog the length of this room when I first started to come back. But he nursed me back to health and my body recovered. And one day he said, do you think you can actually kick a football again? I said, I have no idea if the bags will stay on. So we got some footballs and we went out, and I was healthy for the first time in 2 years, and I'm crushing the ball and the bags are staying on. And I remember thinking, I actually could do this. And then I did something really stupid. I called a meeting with the owner of our team. And I said, will you just allow me to try out? Just try out, no special dispensation, just let me try out. And he could have said, Rolf, city loves you, big blood drive to support you, it's been great, but there's 100 kickers in line. None of them have ostomy bags. But he didn't. He said, if you can prove to the medical staff that you can protect yourself, we'd love you to try out, go talk to Coach Coryell. And I was given a chance to play again, which is ludicrous. But it happens in all of your professions. If you think about how you got where you are, it happens. This guy gave me a chance, like Coach Soker gave me a chance. And I got to play again. And I would play 7 more years, and 4 of those wearing ostomy bags, and then had new surgical techniques and got rid of the bags. But I needed 80 units of blood during my surgeries. 80 units of blood. This is 1979. We knew about non-A, non-B. Nobody knew what it was. HIV was big then. I was telling these guys earlier, I was a big tennis player. Arthur Ashe was a hero of mine. Arthur Ashe had surgery the same year I did, 1979. Had a heart valve replaced. Needed blood, transfused blood. Got HIV and died of AIDS. Should have been me, could have been me. Didn't know anything about this. Fast forward, I finished my career, I'm married, I have 4 kids, and I need more insurance for the kids. So I take an insurance exam. And I get a call from my doctor and said, would you please come in and see me? And I'm going, this isn't good, this isn't good. And I walk in the office and he goes, have you been tired lately? And I go, well, yeah. I mean, we got 4 kids under 6. I'm tired, but you should see my wife. I mean, she's really tired. He goes, you have elevated liver enzymes. We need to check for hepatitis C. And I get the diagnosis of hepatitis C. And I'm going, am I going to die? I have 4 kids depending on me. This is not a silly football career. He goes, well, they've just started clinical trials. I had a great hepatologist at UCI. They just started clinical trials. I think you should go on a clinical trial. I said, I'm in. So I started on one of the early clinical trials done by Amgen, a drug called Infergen, which required me to give myself an interferon shot every day for a year. And Charlie can attest, it's like shooting yourself with the flu. Mark knows. You get sick. You're exhausted. I couldn't walk 10 stairs without having to hold on to the banister and catch my breath. But it wasn't a football career. It was 4 kids and a wife that were depending on me. I didn't miss a dose. I was as religious about that as my workouts. I was working and traveling, and I'd have, 10 syringes in my carry bag, and I looked like a friggin' addict because I was on a clinical trial. And when I was on the drug, there was no detectable virus. For a year, my liver got to heal. And when I went off the drug, the virus came back, and I'm devastated. I'd lost 25 pounds, my hair. And I go to the doctor. He goes, "It's okay, Rolf. We have another clinical trial." I'm going, "Great. We'll start it in 2 months. Catch your breath." I go, "All right. But you can't lose weight. You got to figure out a way to work out." So I start a second trial. It was Shearing-Plow's trial. Same deal. Daily injection for interferon. Sick as a dog. 25% or so of the patients that go on the trials can't finish because the side effects are harsh. And the same thing happened. It worked while I was on the trial. When I went off the drug, the virus came back, and I go, "Oh, no. So now I'm a 2-time loser." But the doctor goes, "Oh, but your liver's healing. It's an organ that can heal itself." So fast forward, science progresses. Mark Noguchi, who's here from Roche, classmate of mine, I'll tear up if I look at him much longer, was working for Roche, developed a drug called Pegasus, a pegylated interferon. Instead of once a day, it was once a week. The half-life was longer. I went on the trial. Side effects weren't quite as bad. I go off the drug. The doctor says, "Come in, let's check your blood and see how you are." He takes my blood. I get a call back, and I'm thinking, "Oh, no. He goes, "Rolf, the blood didn't work. We have to do it again." I go back in. I had just given a talk, driving home from a breakfast talk, and my doctor calls me in my car, and he said, "You're cured of hepatitis C." And I was cured of the Roche Pegasus clinical trial drug because this guy spent 10 years chasing a virus that has now been, through science, provided cures. 98% of patients with Hep C are cured with an all-oral pill, no side effects. Just take the pill for 8 to 12 weeks because of this man, and he deserves applause for that. And that's science, and it starts here, and it starts in the lab, and it gets commercialized by Noguchi and companies like Roche and others to benefit patients like us. And so I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Rolf.
I love the immediate connection between the basic scientist doing the work in the lab to the patient who benefited, and even in the audience or the people who were in between, making it all work. So thank you both. I'm going to double check with Mark. As provost, I'm going to ask for a clock in the back of this room at some point. Little over 10. Okay. So I'm going to do what we call rapid fire questions. That does not mean I'm abusive or they're a target or anything. It's just a quick question with a quick response, 2 sentences max. So and this will be for Charlie, what's the most memorable moment you had on campus as a student? We're going to go to lighter things than life and death.
I don't know. I would be hard pressed to sort of pick one moment because I really enjoyed my time in Davis. So it's a tough question. I think one
How about
thing
pick a memorable moment? That might be easier.
I think one on the sort of science side, sort of one memorable moment was sort of when I was here in the early 70s, there was a very strong group of geneticists here at UC Davis. That may still be the case, I don't know. Theodosius Dobzhansky and Ledyard Stebbins and sort of others. And I think one of the most memorable times that I had as a student was when Ledyard Stebbins was sort of debating the theory of evolution versus special creationism in the sort of chemistry undergraduate room. And it was really just an amazing sort of exchange of science. And I'm a great believer in admitting how ignorant we are about biology, and sort of genetics is something that, sort of allows us to, sort of probe the unknown and find out things we don't. So this was, for me, a very memorable time, the sort of genetic scene here at Davis. Of course, I also like, the viticulture and enology emphasis here.
That wasn't 2 sentences, Charlie, for the record.
No, that's okay. So for newer students, anyone who's only been here maybe a decade or less, there used to be this wonderful bar, and I don't drink, and I'd still call it a wonderful bar, across the street near what's now Trader Joe's, and it was called The Graduate. We all called it The Grad. I don't remember what night it was, but maybe Thursday nights. Pitchers were $1. There were pool tables, Pac-Man, which was a big deal and brand new. All kinds of exciting, fun things, and one of the best burgers you've ever had in your life.
The air hockey tables, too.
Air hockey tables. So, and most of us lived near that part of campus, Sycamore Lane Apartments, this kind of area. So the Grad was packed every day, every night. Yeah. So we're all for you. What was
memorable moment? There are a couple that come to mind. One was, I remember my very first midterm exam. It was a chemistry exam. I studied my tail off. My roommate, who was the smartest guy I've ever met in my life, still didn't study a wink. I'm at the library till midnight, and I get my test score back, and it was a 59. It was a 59. That was a C. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, my roommate got a 94. He didn't study a bit. I'm going, well, I am way out of my league here. But it was like the warning that you better, get it going or you're going to be out of here. That was a very scary, memorable moment. Another memorable moment, actually, my college roommate's still here, Jeff Starr, just a great friend. We got to live together for a bunch of years. He still lives here. But we were reflecting on our senior year. We were in the off-campus apartments, and there was a jacuzzi out front, and we used to a lot of times have dinner and then go sit in the jacuzzi for 20 minutes before we would study. And we were reflecting, remember when we were seniors, we'd sit in the jacuzzi and we'd look at each other and go, what the heck are we going to do with our lives? What are we going to do? We have no clue what we're going to do with our lives. And we both sat together and reflected on our last 50 years and what extraordinarily interesting lives we've both had a chance to live and the friendships we've made along the way. But those were kind of those singular moments that you reflect back on.
Wonderful responses. So, Charlie, what's one thing about UC Davis you think more people should know about? We are definitely humble, sometimes to a fault. So I'll give you a chance to say something we should be proud of.
I think it's the atmosphere here that really sort of makes it this sort of seamless, entwined campus in the city. It's a very nice place to live. Sort of people are nice. I just think the atmosphere here sort of promotes good feelings, and so I think that people probably have to sort of be here to experience that. It's not something that you can sort of show off in a short visit. Although, again, this visit has been sort of wonderful for me, and so I think it's the people, the atmosphere, the folks that are here.
Great. And Rolf, how about for you?
Yeah.
One thing about UC Davis that we should shout out a little more.
So So I would agree with Charlie. There's a humility here, which I always appreciated. My teammates could have gone to Stanford, they could have gone to USC, they could have gone to other places, but they were more interested in, I think, the academic side than the sports side. And even back then, if you played at one of those other institutions, you'd kind of be a full-time athlete and less a student. And the mix of student athletes was real here, and the emphasis was on students. And I love that about this. So you're around these world-class people, not just world-class athletes, world-class people. So that humility, and it was bred by our coaches and our teachers. I would agree with the friendliness. So I came up here from Southern California. We didn't know anybody, literally, and welcoming, encouraging environment that I'm really proud of when I see what UC Davis has grown into. Really thrilled I was a student here.
Love it. Thank you. Okay, I'll start with you again, Rolf, here. If you could relive one day from your time at UC Davis, and be careful, right? But what would it be?
Oh gosh, there's a long list. I had some great experiences here. One very memorable moment that Jeff was part of. When I played football, I also played soccer. It was in the same season, and there was always one game that overlapped, and we had to choose whether I was going to play football or soccer, and the coaches made the decision. So this particular weekend was the All-Cal soccer tournament in Santa Barbara, and because it was 4 games for soccer, they said, you go play down there, and we had a backup kicker, Terry Rutledge, I was trying to think of his name, was the backup kicker, and he was going to kick for the football team. We were playing Sac State. It happened to be the Causeway Classic, but it was one game. So we played the soccer tournament down in Santa Barbara, and my best high school friend went to Santa Barbara, and we finished early. We lost in the semifinal game. It was like 3 o'clock, and he was able to pick me up, drive me to the airport, fly me to LA, and I caught a plane from LA to Sacramento, arriving at 6:45. The football game started at 7:30 or 7, whatever it was. So Jeff and my other roommate picked me up with a, Jack in the Box hamburger and drove me to the stadium where I could see the team. They were just finishing warm-ups, they're about to kick off, and I'm trying to get in the door of the locker room, and the guy goes, "This is for football." I go, "I'm a football player." "You're not a football player." "You want to see my cleats?" And so he wouldn't let me in. So I had to flag down somebody on the team. They let me in, and I quick put on my uniform, and we kicked 3 field goals in the first quarter. We won the game by 5 points, and it was one of those sort of silly, stupid moments, but I remember it because it was classic Davis that they would allow me to do that sort of thing. Yeah, silly.
Silly and wonderful. You can do it all. Okay, it's the last of the rapid fire questions. Which UC Davis place or building holds the most sentimental value to you, and why? I'll start with Charlie.
Ooh, I don't know. There are so many new buildings on campus. I don't know. Probably the one that holds the most sentimental value is the sort of dorm that I sort of was in as a freshman, which was the sort of Reagan complex Nova, and that was sort of my first time away from home. And again, I just sort of found sort of a home there. Sort of meeting new people and new friends. Some of whom are sort of in the audience here, and that was very, very special. And then I think the sort of, what was it, 194 Chem?
And 194.
Yeah, 194 Chem, now Rock Hall.
That has some.
But we're
memories.
the 194 Chem vintage. Yeah.
No, that lecture hall was sort of where these debates would take place, sort of between Stebbins and Dwayne Gish. But I think Nova Reagan be the place.
It's also where we got to watch movies, was 194 Chem. So.
Absolutely.
That's right.
For sure. That was a big, is that still around, Chem 194?
Yeah,
it?
it's Rock Hall now.
Rock Hall
It just
now?
has a different name, but it looks the same.
Yeah.
It is refurbished. I should put back on my Provost hat. It's been renovated, but it looks like 194 Chem still. Yeah. So Rolf, how about for you, a building or place that you have sentimental feelings towards?
Yeah, one I think was my dorm in Tercero H building. It looked right down on sort of the little plaza where you could watch people go to dinner. And I remember we'd go to dinner and come back, and my 3 roommates, we had a suite. We would sit there and play the Eagles and a couple other songs. Then we'd go to the study hall or the library and study. And those were very formative times for me. And then I think Hickey Gym. Does Hickey Gym even still exist?
Yes.
So Hickey Gym was, George Lewis, it was amazing. Our, magical hands, the coaches there, Will Lauder, Jim Soker, those were formative years. I used to smile at, we played at the field there. I mean, how many people could watch a game in the old 3,000? Skip, how many? About that? About 3,000? I remember, my first week at the Raiders, and I'm sitting next to guys that played in front of 100,000 people. 3,000, if you add another 1,000, if you include the cows on the outside. But I wouldn't trade it. Those were extraordinary places. And even being back up here, seeing so many of you and reflecting all this, it just brings back a warm spot in my heart for this. And I think, like a lot of things in life, you don't necessarily appreciate it when you're going through it. It was a unique time for us. It's a unique campus. We don't have a frame of reference when we're students to compare that. I agree, the connection with the community, or it's sort of seamless that way, was very special.
Love it. Thank you. So Mark, would you like to take questions from the audience?
Thank you. That was wonderful. So people are welcome to come up to the microphones or wave to have one brought to you with a question. I think we have one.
Randy.
Please.
Oh, gosh. How are you, man?
We got the, thank you. When Rolf was a freshman, I was a freshman too. And I remember we played a freshman game at Merced Junior College, and they asked me to go shag footballs when he was practicing his place kicking, and they kicked it out of the stadium, and I'm in the parking lot in the dark. But Rolf, I was here at Davis one day, and I went in to talk to the information director for athletics, and I had a question about something about sports, and we got to be talking about you. And he goes, it just so happens I was just talking to Rolf just before you got in here, and he said politely, I have to go because Barbara Bush is on the other phone. Can you tell us your stories about mentoring the Bush family?
Wow. So, Randy, great to see you. Thanks for coming, man. Yeah, so again, if it go in the camp of bad things that happen to you, are they really bad? So my illness, I would argue, was really bad. But it turns out to be one of the great blessings in my life, and gave me a purpose for my life, allowed me to get involved in healthcare, but it also allowed me to meet extraordinary people. And one of those was an experience that happened in like 1984. I was still playing. I played 77 to 86. It's in the off season, and I have, I'm single, but I have an assistant come, and she worked downstairs in an office, and I had an upstairs office, and the phone rings. And back then we had this primitive intercom system where she buzzed me and said, there's a phone call for you. And I buzz her back, said, who was it? And she buzzes me and she says, it was the vice president. I buzz her back, says, vice president of what? She said, he just said the vice president. So I picked the phone up off of hold, and it was the vice president, George Bush, calling. I'm going, so sorry, Mr. Vice President. No, it's okay. And he couldn't have been nicer. George Bush Sr. was calling because he goes, Rolf, we're sports fans. We know what you've gone through. My youngest son, Marvin, George W.'s brother, had ulcerative colitis and just had a colectomy and is wearing an ostomy bag. What kind of life can we expect him to live? And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. So I got to spend half an hour on the phone with him, and he invited me to come back to Washington to see his son. And I had the privilege of going back and spent 3 days in Washington with his son Marvin, and we became great friends. And Marvin was a really good tennis player. I said, Marvin, you'll be able to do anything you did prior to this, anything. And he said, even tennis? I said, you'll be able to play tennis without a problem. A year later, I got to go back and play tennis on the White House tennis court, and he killed me. He's a good player. I thought I was a good player. But that friendship never stopped, and the Bushes never forgot. And Mrs. Bush and George Sr. and then George W. never forgot. And that they're just normal people, like whomever. A Nobel Prize winner is a normal person, you find out. And the privilege of meeting those people was just extraordinary. But thank you, Randy, for that. It was a very special moment. Yeah.
Another question? Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Hi, Mark Noguchi, also a UC Davis zoology major and classmate of Rolf's. But question for Professor Rice, and this is not meant to be a political question, but with looking to the future, and you talked a little bit about this with respect to future viruses and the challenges that we face. Looking to the future with changing world conditions, particularly weather conditions, perhaps global warming, are there particular threats that you see, or new viruses or changes in the viral situation that we might be concerned about, or talking to future virologists in the world, we might want to concentrate on as the world changes?
Well, I think you bring up a very, very important sort of challenge, and I think we've sort of seen examples where sort of intersection between urban areas and undeveloped areas sort of concede sort of epidemics, and this is sort of the way that yellow fever, which persists in the jungle, can end up in in an urban area and cause trouble. But I think, yeah, the sort of climate change and all the things that are happening in terms of the biosphere are very important to consider when you're thinking about infectious disease. I mean, we've seen examples of that in spades with the pandemic and how rapidly this can, sort of spread around the world, given that we fly around in planes and so on and so forth. And I think the temperature changes really are making a big difference. I mean, we're seeing some of we call these arboviruses. They're arthropod-borne viruses transmitted by mosquitoes or ticks. I mean, we're already seeing the sort of range of some of these viruses expanding as a consequence of, a few degrees difference and the differences in the rainfall and other things. So I think it's part of a more sort of holistic look, I think, at sort of biology and where humans sort of fit on the planet. And I think we have to really sort of think about that more broadly. And it is an issue not only locally, but this is a global issue. And so I think we need to be certainly cognizant of trying to do the best that we can for our population here, but at least in terms of infectious disease, this is a global problem. And so we really have to sort of treat it that way and try and sort of build alliances with sort of like-minded people and organizations around the world to try and do a better job there. So yeah, I think climate change is definitely something that's changing, and it will change the distribution of infectious disease pandemic threats. So.
Thank you. Other questions? I don't want to. No.
I'm happy to run it out to you if you need it. Oh, okay.
Great, thanks. Hoping for some student questions. Great.
My name is Jessica. I'm a current graduate student here, and thank you so much for sharing your stories. Like, it's very inspiring. And I guess my question is, like, for the students, like, how would you encourage hope? Like, hope through overcoming all the failures of the experiments, and then hope of overcoming, like, your health and, like, continuing on in your career? Because both is very complicated. So what advice would you give?
What, and when things don't go the way you want, how do you? I don't know. I mean, I think you've got to have a pretty thick skin in science.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's true of other scientists, but my success rate was not high. So that was the solution to that was do more, try harder. And I think, even if you see something as a failure, and I think Rolf was, sort of mentioning this earlier, it's really not. I mean, these things can really sort of teach you something. And when things don't work out, sort of the way that you might think they should, but you've done a good experiment, that's kind of what you hope for, because, it doesn't fit your hypothesis. It must be wrong. Your hypothesis is based on, probably what other people have done and what you're thinking at the time. And if you really sort of test that and you get a result that's unexpected, I mean, I think that's, some people might go off and, be upset that their experiment didn't turn out exactly the way that they wanted. But sometimes that's when you are really at the cusp of discovering something new. So maybe if the experiment didn't work in your mind, maybe if it's not something technical and you can sort of repeat it and it repeats, but it's, totally unexpected, based on what's known before, I think that's kind of what you hope for. But,
Let me
don't get
the other side to that. So great answer there on the science side. Let me talk about sort of the personal side, because you asked a great question. So I don't think there's a more powerful force in the universe than hope. So with it, you can do almost anything. Without it, you can do almost nothing. How do you get there? I'll just share a personal experience. When I went through my illness, I was so angry. I was so bitter. My life was ending. My career was over. I would never get married. All the things that I thought would never happen. I didn't want to see anybody. I was so discouraged, bitter, just ashamed, all of the above. And I remember teammates would come by my parents' house and want to see me. And I would tell Mom, I go, Mom, I don't want to see him. I've got 2 bags on my side. I can't even stand up. And Mom would politely say, I'll tell Rolf you're here. There were a couple that wouldn't take that for the answer. And they said, I want to see Rolf. And they would walk in, literally pick me up. I'm thinking specifically of a guy named Louis Kelcher, 350 pounds, literally picked me up, put me in the car, and we drove up the coast. And I was emotional, and he sat there with me, and he just said, we're going to go through this together. And I came back, and I was encouraged to read a book written by a POW, several POWs that had survived 6 years in the Hanoi Hilton in Vietnam, and how they were able to do that. They shared this story of what they did, and I applied those techniques to my journey. It was break time down into bite-sized increments. So for them, it was, how do I get through the day? Literally, because at night they stopped beating me or torturing me. That was the first thing. The second thing they did was we had to learn to set small little goals. So for them, it was do 100 push-ups, 300 sit-ups, walk the cell, which was 8 feet by 8 feet, 50 times, and memorize the name of all the people in the camp. In case I got out, I could tell other people who was there. And then the last thing is they had to wrestle with God. Is there a God? If there's no God, this is just a bad nightmare without any redeeming value. If there is a God, and the promises of the Bible are true, and then I have a responsibility to see what God does with my life. So with that, I started. My little goal was to get out of bed and walk to the mailbox and back. And the next day, to walk 2 mailboxes on the street, and then 3 mailboxes. It was this sort of post-surgical shuffer. I could only walk like this, but I made it, and then back again. And in the process, I started to change. I went from being bitter, and I've learned subsequently, I really went through the 5 stages of grief, where you bargain, and ultimately you say, you accept it. So we have a choice. We can stay bitter, or we can get better. And you don't get better until you accept where you are, and then you get to move forward and see what happens. And the door's open. You heal. The owner gives you a chance. You get a chance to play. The next thing you know, you're sitting here with a Nobel Prize winner, and you go, oh, how did this happen? It's not possible. And so the hope comes from, I think, people that have gone ahead of you in whatever the circumstance. You lose a kid, you get divorced, you get fired from a job, whatever it is, you have a choice. You can be the victim. Life's not fair. And you know what? It's not. It's absolutely not. And you can take that on and see where it takes you. What do I do now? And that's where life gets interesting. And you want to be around people that look at that way, that you're not a victim. It didn't, no, it happened. Yes. Let's go figure out where it goes from here. And when you're around those kinds of people, they're inspiring. I mean, I get to speak to these patients. Brings you to your knees. And you become changed. You discover you have greater courage, greater perseverance, greater creativity than you ever thought you had. And with that, it brings you to the next place, and you are more capable. So, long answer, but it's a worthy wrestle. Thank you.
Ron.
I have a question. Is this on?
There you go.
Okay, I have a question for Dr. Rice. You talked about the plethora of viruses that are out there, and we don't know how many ultimately could become a vector for disease. Okay, but I'd kind of like to flip that a little bit, because most of them attack bacteria. We are going into a post-antibiotic world with more and more strains of bacteria becoming resistant to antibiotics, and not that many antibiotics on the horizon. So I was wondering what your prognosis was for capturing more of the bacteriophages and having the phages be, the way to get rid of a bacteria infection, like they've done in the Soviet Union and the Eastern.
I think you bring up a great point, and I didn't want to sort of give the impression that all viruses are bad. And in fact, we use them for a lot of different things. But the idea of sort of phage therapy has been around for more than 100 years. And there's actually a lot of work done on this sort of in the Soviet Union. It kind of fell into sort of disfavor. And now it's undergoing a real sort of rebirth. And there are sort of cases where, sort of bacteriophage have actually been used to, sort of treat bacterial infections and save people's lives. I mean, these are small numbers and it's sort of anecdotal, but there's a huge renewed enthusiasm in terms of looking more at sort of the bacteriophage space, sort of tropism of bacteria. There's always, as you can imagine, kind of a battle that's going on between phage and bacteria, this sort of arms race. And people are even trying to think about sort of designing phages so that the bacteria could become less resistant to sort of phage infection and killing. So it may be possible to really sort of match the right phage with the right kind of bacterial infection. So I think it's a very exciting new area. There's a lot of activity in this area now. So that would be an example where we can take advantage of the incredible biodiversity that exists in the phage space and actually use it for something useful.
All right, thank you. And thank you for the questions, and thank you for the wonderful conversation, a lot of personal advice, professional advice. We greatly appreciate it. And the reminiscence was wonderful. I do want to say that a few things don't change. Rolf, students still struggle with first-year chemistry. It still happens. And Charlie, thank you for calling out your research experience in the lab. It's still something that's very valuable to students, essential for many of them. Our faculty are deeply engaged in that. It's a priority for the dean's office. I know it's a priority for the provost. So thank you for raising that up for this group. Before we thank our speakers, I do want to say that we have some gifts for them.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
In their bag, they will find a CBS quarter zip pullover. They're new
Nice.
from the Bio
Nice.
Boosters, a club here in the college, and you can buy your own if you like back there to support student activities. I want to thank you for attending. I want to certainly thank Rolf and Charlie today and Provost Croughan for moderating. I want to thank the CBS office along with the offices of the Chancellor and the Provost for helping us put all of today's activities together. The sorry, I get tongue-tied sometimes. Botanical Conservatory supplied our plants up here today.
I was
And
wondering.
before we thank our speakers, I want to remind you there's a reception right outside where you can meet them personally if you had additional questions. Again, Rolf and Charlie, thank you so much.
Thank you.